Okay, so we are live on air, and one of the things that I am really happy about is that I have another screen to my left. We are live, and so to prevent any further distractions, I'm going to take that away. I'm really happy that you all are joining me today. My name is Era Tansey. I am the previous chair of the records management section. The current chair is Courtney Bailey, and today we are having one of our hangouts, which we've done in the past, where we are going to be talking about some records transparency issues with local and state records. And the idea behind this is that if we look at the news, particularly from our perspectives as records managers or archivists, we often notice that federal records issues tend to dominate that news. But on a daily basis, the records management decisions that are made by state and local government officials affect people's lives in very dramatic ways. Many Americans know about their access to federal records through things like FOIA. There are standardized retention schedules across a lot of federal agencies, but things can get much more, there's a lot more variation at the local and state level. And what this means is that citizens in one jurisdiction might be able to access records in different ways than people who live in a different jurisdiction. So today I am joined by Sarah Jacobson, who's from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, and Kathy Marquis, who is from the Wyoming State Archives. And they're here to speak with us today about transparency and public interest regarding records at the local and state level. If you are interested in a question for either of these two, we will have about 15 minutes of questions and answers at the end. The best way to get in on asking a question is if you're watching via the YouTube link. We'll be monitoring the comments there and the questions there. If you're on Twitter, Brad Houston, who is another steering committee member, will be monitoring the hashtag SAARMS. So Sarah and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to start by asking both of you, Kathy, you can start if you'd like, to tell us a little bit about your job. And then secondly, what does transparency in records management mean to you? Kathy, make sure your mic is unmuted. Sarah, can you hear Kathy? I just want to make sure it's not just me.
No, I can't hear Kathy.
Okay. Well, Kathy,
and my light switched off.
By the way, everyone, Sarah's in an area with motion sensor lights, so she
I might just not worry about it. It kind of looks interesting with the lights off, so if I can get it on.
Dramatic effect. Well, Kathy's fixing her microphone. Do you want to go ahead and take that question?
Sure.
Telling us a little bit about your job and what does transparency in records management mean to you?
Yeah, be happy to. So hi, I'm Sarah Jacobson. I work at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, and I am the manager of our Records Management Assistance Unit. We have about 8 analysts who serve the state of Texas. We do offer basically records management consulting and training to local governments as well as state agencies across the state of Texas. And we do training, face-to-face training online, and just kind of basically we kind of call ourselves the Records Management Help Desk Unit for the state of Texas to help local governments and state agencies with their programs. And we also do retention schedule development and review and approval of state agency schedules. So the question for transparency, I kind of just go back to sort of access, which is, kind of why we're in the professional information management business, is kind of providing access to information, and not only to think of it as we always see with Public Information Act that we have obligation to provide transparency and provide access to government operations. But I think you should go think of it beyond obligation, is that it should be just a given right for people to be able to know how governments operate, and to be able to just find information and be able to help themselves out. So that's why I just think of it just in terms of just access and openness.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you
Okay.
for fixing that, Kathy.
I apologize to everyone. There's a tiny little button on my microphone that I inadvertently pushed, apparently. So thank you for having me as part of this program, and apologies to everyone for the fact that I look like an air traffic flight controller over here with my earphones and headphones. So I have been the Deputy State Archivist since 2016, and more recently the Interim State Archivist since our State Archivist left for the state of Virginia. Um, I was thinking about this question more in terms of me. So I was thinking that I have some limited experience with records management. When I was hired for the job, there was a head of the records management unit, but in between when I was hired and when I came on, that person left, and the state, which was going through an economic downturn at the time, decided that we couldn't fill the position. So suddenly I was the head of records management. So that was fun. Now, since then, we've been allowed to hire someone to run the day-to-day business of the records management unit and also our imaging center. And I supervise that person. And I also supervise the 4.5 staff that we have in our what's considered a more traditional archives. The state archives is obviously responsible for documenting the work of state government, for collecting those records, for appraising them. We also have functioning digital archives, and we're about 5 years down the road now in managing the digital records of the state. And this year, for the first time, we actually had records in the digital archives, all of which are input with their record schedules that came up for destruction for the first time. So that was kind of an interesting process to go through. So I can talk lots more about the state archives, but that's the basic what we do. And in terms of transparency in records management, I would say the records retention schedules are all on our website. That's something that I spend a lot of time looking at other people's websites to see if the record schedules are there. So I wanted to make sure that ours were too. We spend a lot of time telling state agency staff, for example, and local government staff where they can find the schedules and look at them and ask us questions about them. The record schedules themselves are determined by a statutorily created state records committee, and that committee meeting that we advertise the meeting dates and times, and they're open to the public. Now, that doesn't mean that we're swarmed with people coming to attend our meetings or ask us questions, but we're very sure that that's the way that we want to go, that we want to be open to the public, that we want to be able to answer questions, that we want everyone to be able to see what it is that we're doing. And I guess I would say that I don't really have any qualms about whether or not we're open enough. I think what we could do a better job of is outreach and making sure that everyone knows they can see what we do and ask us questions about what we do.
Great, thank you. So the question that I have for a couple questions for both of you might be if you could talk about how records retention scheduling decisions are made in the jurisdiction that you have responsibility for, and how citizens can access public records. In Kathy's case, this would be from state agencies and officials, and in Sarah's case, how would citizens access public records from Texas local government and officials? So Kathy, if you could take those first couple of questions first, that would be great.
Sure. Well, just to reiterate what I said before, all of our record schedules are online, and those are for state agencies. As we also are the body that creates and approves record schedules for local government units. So they're bound by those schedules, although we don't have a really strong enforcement arm. So they some of the things that come up in the state records committee meetings are when local governments come to us and say, the schedule isn't working for us, can we talk about how it could be adjusted? And I wanted to take a step back just for a second and talk about the fact that we use functional schedules, or sometimes they're called a big bucket schedule system. And that is about 5 years old. It's been about 5 years since we implemented that. And we created those schedules with the assistance of a consulting firm. Then they went through the state records committee, but they also, in the case of the state agencies, each one of those state agencies was shown the schedules that they would be using, and we got sign off from each of them. So now with turnover, you talk to somebody in an office and they say, what? I don't know anything about that. So it's a constant education process as well. But each agency did sign off on the schedules that they were being asked to follow. We didn't really have that option with the local government agencies that we serve, and because there are just too many of them and they're all over the state. So what we've done instead is we've made every effort to go to local government meetings, the county clerk meetings, municipal clerk and treasurer meetings. If they're there, we'll talk to them. And we've actually spoken to both of those sets of groups, I think, every year since the new schedules came into effect. There was a lot of pushback at the beginning because it was new and they weren't used to it. And we did go from 8,000 schedules to 600. So they were used to having each schedule for each agency for each type of records. And we've obviously gone in a very different direction since then. But in the meetings that I've attended in the last couple of years, it really has not been, it's more been tell us how to use them and less why is this happening. So we feel good about that level of outreach. And then you asked about how citizens can access public records from Wyoming state agencies and officials. Obviously, if they've already come to the archives, then they can just come here or talk to us about how to use them. If they're still in the agency and in the custody of the agency, then they can just make a flat out request, or they can initiate a public records request. And Era, did you want me to talk about that now, or did you want to have that be a separate section? Because we have.
Sure, with the thing where you appeared in the COSA update.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
That would be great. And if
Okay.
you could provide a little bit of background about some of the things that recently happened.
Okay. So Wyoming has had a Public Records Act on the books since 1977. Then just this year, there were amendments which were passed, which went into effect just at the beginning of this month. And so the thing about the COSA news crawl or whatever was that the local paper created an article which COSA saw, which said that there were sweeping changes to the public records laws, and there really weren't. Basically, I would call this kind of a tightening of some of the regulations and how public records requests are made. So now each government entity, local and state level, has to assign the duty of designated public records person to someone in their agency. So it's not a new job, it's just a new set of tasks for someone who's already in the job. And in our agency, that's gone to the person who is the administrative assistant for our director. And basically, it just means that there's somebody kind of on the job monitoring the public records request, regardless of which office it goes to, and make sure that the time frames are kept and so forth. There also needs to be somebody in each agency who is designated as the ombudsman to monitor any requests on the part of the public for redress if they feel that their records request has not been fully answered or it's been denied. So basically, it's just saying we want to know who we should talk to. Okay, these are the people, and they have to register those people with the Department of Administration and Information. And then the deadlines were tightened. So in the past, there was a 7-day response time, but there was all kinds of, they had something that they called the good cause exception for not responding in 7 days. And they basically eliminated that good cause exception. So So in other words, the person who's making the request has to have some kind of response in 7 days. That sounds very reasonable. And but then there are ways for either the agency or the archives to say that the cost will be too great, or the effort the level of effort involved needs to be addressed. And they have longer times to respond in that way. So really, those were the only changes that were made. And seemed not very controversial to us. But the one thing that interested me about the new act is that it does say that that the agency needs to respond within the 7 days about whether the records are within their custody or not. And they just sort of loosely say they might be in storage. And I'm thinking, I bet they mean archives. So but then there's this interesting line that says, there is no statutory duty for the designated public records person to independently search for this information about where the records are. And so I guess I take that to mean that that puts more burden on us, and that's a good thing, to make sure that agencies know that we have their past records, so that they can't just say, well, we have no idea where these are, and have that be legit. You know, we want the public to be able to see these records. So that's the answer to the question about what has changed recently, and also what was up with that story that was on the COSA feed. But basically, you know, if we can answer questions quickly, we will. There are now very specific guidelines in place for answering a written public records request, and we answer questions like that all the time.
Great, thanks so much. Sarah, I wonder if you would jump in and talk about you know, some of these retention scheduling decisions, how they work at the local level in Texas, and then how people access records at the local level.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so in the state of Texas, we at the Texas State Library, we are responsible for developing, creating the retention schedules for local governments to kind of provide that minimum requirements or standards by which they are to retain their information and implement their own schedules. And we do also do retention schedule approvals for those, there's been some changes with our legislation this past session to kind of streamline that process a little bit. But and then in a nutshell, we have 12 local government schedules that we publish. They're somewhat functional. It's kind of, we have a general schedule that is applicable to all local governments. And just to give you some understanding of the structure, we have 254 counties in the state of Texas, and we have about 10,000 local government units. And that is county government, special utility districts, school districts, pretty much any public office is who we deal with. So we have 12 published schedules, the general schedule, and then we have ones that are pertaining to particular offices, like a county clerk schedule or district clerk. We also have a school district schedule for public school districts. And then from there, we have, public works, we have health, hospital districts, et cetera. Our process is we usually, through our consulting, the analysts consult, advise, and a lot of the times our number one question is always, how long do I have to retain XYZ document? So over time, we kind of develop suggested revisions to our schedules. Through the consulting work or through new legislation, we find gaps in our schedule. So we kind of know that we need to add certain things to the schedule or add language. And then we have a process by which we get those schedules updated and approved. We do not have a committee, so to speak, that does approval of our schedules. These actually go before our commission for their approval. However, these are codified in our administrative rule process. So part of that is actually we go out for public comment that is open to the public, as well as local governments are involved in the process of being able to comment or make suggestions for edits and revisions to the schedules. And we do rely on that a lot because there's my lights going off again. We do rely on that a lot for their feedback, because we're not the subject matter experts on county clerk records or hospital records. So we really rely on those local government entities to kind of help us develop the schedules, because they are really for them to use. And we want them to be useful and actually be able to be implemented within their programs. Let me get these lights on so I can actually read my own information. And beyond that, So how local governments access information, we have in the state of Texas, we have the Public Information Act as well as the Open Meetings Act. There's always, this last legislative session, I know we were tracking about 20 or so bills that we were only tracking that dealt with updates to the Public Information Act, kind of to streamline and improve that for local governments. So citizens, interact with local governments to access information. And that's really in the local level. So, they have put information requests. We have similar time frame. There's a 10-day time frame in the state of Texas for responding to information requests. And so, there's always pieces that we track every legislative session, similar to what Kathy was talking about. And only about 20 or so were ones we were tracking. There's voluminous number of changes to the Public Information Act every year that we have to track and make sure that everyone's up to speed with. I'm trying to think of anything else I didn't think about. That's it in a nutshell. I guess if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
And Era, I was just going to add that our schedules on our website, if you go to wyoarchives.org and go down to the right-hand corner, it says record schedules. There's a link so people can just see them right there. They're really easy.
Yeah, I'll ask you. All of our schedules are also online too, so they're accessible through our website, as well as even our state agency schedules. I know we talk about local, but our state agencies all have the unique schedules that we post online as well, so they're accessible to the public.
And could both of you just say, because I am trying to keep an eye on Twitter, and I noticed that at least one person asked about the websites for the schedules. So could you either say once more, both of you, what is the applicable site for the schedules? And if it's too hard to say the whole thing because it's long, what is a good Googleable phrase that will definitely turn it up?
Go ahead, Kathy, if you want to.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, so we have a shortened version of our website, which is wyoarchives.org. And as I said, if you just scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page on the right-hand side, there's a green rectangle that says record schedules. And that's the easiest way to get to the record schedules.
And probably the most easiest way for our purposes is to either just Google Texas State Library and Archives or go to our main tsl.texas.gov. And there is a heading at the very kind of top right to the page that says Records Management. And if you click that Records Management tab, that will be the main portal to our local side as well as our state side, and you will see a retention schedule, state retention schedules, all of our laws and publications, as well as our blog and all information dealing with state and local records management.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you. So one question I'd like to dive into a little bit, and I think that both of you have walked up to this a little bit already, is what are some of the, have you noticed, are there any particularly complicated issues that have come up in your experience with doing records management at your respective levels? We've had past records management section hangouts about things like scheduling email, about law enforcement body-worn cameras. So I know these are hot topics for a lot of people working in records management at local and state levels. And can you speak to any of these kind of hot topics in your area? And whoever would like to lead that off, please feel free to.
Sarah, do you want to go?
Sure, I can. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned body-worn cameras. There's usually always, it seems, every couple of years, new legislation or new technologies that I think cause frustration and concern for local governments. I know on the local side, for them, it stems down to, I think, a lot of infrastructure that they don't have and resources to kind of, transform or have a digital transformation of their content information. And so, and they're also just burdened by the amount of information they have to manage. I know the body-worn cameras was something that's been on the radar across the entire United States for a couple of years now. We actually did have legislation that passed the last legislative session that actually prescribes some retention periods for body-worn camera footage. I don't know that off the top of my head right now, but it's in our public safety schedule that we have. So if you go to our website and see the public safety schedule, it is listed in that. That was one thing that was, yeah, definitely, that was a hot topic. We still, email and text messages and things like that are still always a hot topic. I'm not sure if I'll ever, see the magic bullet for email management. And people are still dealing with that. And we still even have people ask about where I don't see the retention period for email in your schedule. We have to do the whole, however, we are a medium, not media, we're a media neutral schedule. So, an email is about the content and function that it's communication, et cetera. So many times you have to do that learning curve education about teaching people that they're not just going to see email. It be 2-year retention period in the schedule. Same for text messages, things like that. I think I'll turn over to Kathy. If you want to.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pick up on the body-worn cameras because that was something that came up several years ago. In 2017, we were contacted by a local chief of police, and he had just been hit with a $50,000 storage bill for the body-worn camera footage from his officers. And I've been thinking about it. $50,000 may not seem like a lot for a really big state, but it was huge for a small city in Wyoming. So at the time, our schedule said 2 years retention for video footage. And I think that was from the time when it was the dash cam and you turned it on at very specific times and it didn't result in that much footage. And now, as he said to us a number of times, that he had guys who forgot to turn it off when they went to the restroom. And, not only did he not want to pay to keep that, he just didn't even want to hear it at all. So we talked with him as the person who brought us the issue, but we very much wanted to speak with people on all sides of the issue. He was very clear, though, that his preference would be to find a way to retain the footage that he felt related to any kind of serious incident. He definitely was not of the opinion that he resented the existence of the footage or didn't want it to be there. He wanted it. He just wanted a way to differentiate between routine driving along in the car and footage that documented something that could potentially come up in court. So we brought that to the State Records Committee and asked what their advice would be. And the State Records Committee consists of the State Archivist, someone from the Auditor's Office, the Department of Audit, and then also a representative from the Attorney General's Office. And our AG rep at the time gave me contact information for the Wyoming Public Defender's Office, the Defense Lawyers Association of Wyoming, the Wyoming County Attorneys Association, and the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association. And I was able to get in touch with, it was usually the president of the association, although in some cases it was the executive director, a paid staff person, within pretty short order. And I had a set list of questions that I asked them about what they wanted us to keep in mind when we were making the schedule. And I should say, as an aside, I've lived in a lot of different states, and Wyoming is, I wouldn't say it's the least litigious, but it has the least legislation about every topic of any state that I've ever lived in. If you're looking for legislative guidelines, the chances are they're not there. And I guess I would say that our state has a somewhat libertarian bent. If we can exist without regulating or legislating a topic, we will. So there wasn't a lot of guidelines in the legislation. And that was why it was particularly useful for me to have these experts on various sides of the law, or at least the legal profession, to assist me. I had made a proposal, and it was that we keep the routine footage for 90 days and then come up with some better guidelines for keeping footage that we thought was going to come up again. And at the time I was using the term serious incidents. And after somewhat lengthy discussions with all of these people, basically they all said, hey, we wish you could keep it forever so that if it ever came up again, it would be there for us to use. But we understand that that's not possible. And another piece of information that I told all of them was that this chief of police had said, if I'm required to keep all of it for years, I'm going to stop having my officers wear the cameras. I can't afford that. And again, here in Wyoming, they don't have to. So the attorneys that I spoke with understood that that was just reality. And so when I came up with a new schedule, they were willing to, I don't think I got anybody's actual signatures, but they were willing to say, yes, that works for us. So our new schedule, which is called Surveillance Digital Devices, has a split retention period of 90 days or 5 years. So the title of the subtitle is Records Related to Routine Surveillance by Digital Device. And then the language is routine footage may be destroyed or recycled 90 days after create date. Footage documenting injuries, offenses against the person, which is language given to me by one of the county attorneys, or detentions must be retained 5 years after the completion of the incident or investigation or court case. And that seemed to satisfy everyone. So that's what we're going with for now. All of our schedules are works in progress. So if yet another piece of technology comes along and we have to rethink it, we will. But that's what's in place for now, and that was passed by our State Records Committee. So it's a fascinating process, again, because I couldn't just say, well, what does the law say? And I needed to consult with as many parties, interested parties as I could, and that's what we came up with.
Great. Well, one of the things that I just want to acknowledge is I see a surprising number of people are asking questions in the Twitter feed. So
hope we have answers.
So yeah, so I think maybe what we can do is switch gears a little bit and just to make sure we get to as many of these questions as possible. We'll go ahead and switch over to that. So the first question I think that came in was actually specifically for Kathy, which is, do the public records officers in the agencies receive any training? And if so, is it mandatory?
Definitely not mandatory. Remember, Wyoming. But the Attorney General's office does have a workshop for public records, for people responding to public records requests. I think they could spread that out a little further than they have. They are unwilling at this point to record it and make it available just anywhere at any time. They want to do it in person because they get lots of interesting questions. I think they may have to shift a little there and make their education more widely available. However, we are leaving it to them at this point because we consider that it has more of a, we'd rather have legal staff on hand to answer those questions.
Okay, we had another question come in that was, are local and state governments using CRMs, which I think I might, well, I often hear that as very different things, but CRMs like iConstituent or Intranet Quorum, how are you archiving the records and data in those systems? And maybe you could expand that question to be, are you using any particular software or database system in your work?
I'll take this. Yeah, I can't speak to what local governments around the state because, as well as agencies, they're on multiple platforms. If we're talking about actually, content records management systems, I know one popular software that a lot of our local government entities, especially city government municipalities in Texas, are on Laserfiche for their records management needs. We here at this Texas State Library in our records management, we don't have an actual content management system. That's something we've wanting to we've talked as an agency, but we kind of still use access databases. We still have some FileMaker databases that we use to track a lot of our consulting statistics. and our local government compliance documentation. We do actually have we did implement a new system. I didn't really speak to this, but on the state side of things, we also operate the State Record Center, which houses inactive records for state agencies as well as local governments, but primarily state agencies. And we also have imaging unit out there that does digital imaging for state agencies. So we actually implemented a new system that was kind of for our inventory tracking kind of billing system. It was InfoLinks system that we use that, and it's really streamlined our operations, being able to track our inventory for record storage boxes as well as it's allowed us to track and bill for our imaging projects. And then we also, my unit actually has used it to track our kind of approval process for our state agency schedules. So we kind of have some workflows that we've been able to build in to kind of track that progress. I kind of probably went off another tangent with that, but that's kind of the systems that we've been able to use.
And we also use InfoLinks for managing our paper records and the record center. There's probably some functionalities of it that we don't use. We don't bill, for example. But when you said access, I was like, do we? Oh, yeah, all of our record schedules are in an access database, which we very much need to move them out of. But I'll speak about our digital archives. I am not the staff expert on the digital archives, but we use an HP product. It's gone through about 7 different names right now. It's called HPE. And we are bringing in more and more state agencies, but we're also working with local government agencies to help them manage their digital records. We've got, I don't know the number offhand, but more than a handful of county clerks that we're working with. And at the moment, we're mostly helping them store their non-currently used digital records. So we're basically providing storage, long-term storage or permanent storage for the kinds of records that the archives is interested in helping them manage. And it's been an interesting process because it involves remote access that we haven't had to deal with here in the state capitol. But we feel that it's going very well. And I know that our digital archivist would be happy to answer questions for other records managers or archivists out there who are interested in going that route. We don't have a lot on our website about the digital archives. There's like a 2-page handout that explains what the charges are and how people can talk to us about coming online. So if people have more specific questions, I'd be happy to either answer them now if I can, or get back to people with answers.
And I will like to add, didn't even think about our digital archives. I'm definitely, again, not the expert to be able to talk about it, but we do have our Texas digital archives, so I can point people to be able to access or talk to staff. But we are on a Preservica system that we use for the Texas Digital Archive, or the TDA is how we refer to it as.
We had another question come in via Twitter, and I'll just mention for anyone who missed it at the beginning, if you do have a question, the best way to get it on our radar before we end in 20 minutes here is to either leave a comment on YouTube where we're broadcasting this live stream, or there's a Twitter hashtag, which is hashtag SAARMS, SAARMS, and if you hashtag that, we'll make sure that we get it to our presenters. So the other question that someone brought forward was whether there would be a difference in lessening the burden of records managers with the promotion and implementation of state and local governments adopting an open data policy. I think there's a lot going on in that question. So my best interpretation or translation of this might be, I know a lot of governments are adopting sort of, a proactive open data policy, right? You see this a lot with budgets. It's proactively disclosed, right? You don't have to file a records request or wait for the records to be transferred to the archive. It just automatically goes online. So do either of you have any direct experience with those kind of open data policies? And do you have any perspectives on how that might impact your work as records managers?
I guess I have 2 thoughts about that. I don't know that there's anything that I can say about an open data policy as such, because I really haven't heard that come up here. But I will say two things. One is my hunch is that the legislation that passed this past year was partially in response to one big public records request from one state agency, which took a very long time to respond and was very unsure that they would be able to respond in any meaningful way because of the amount of records that were requested. This was all separate from the archives because the records were all still in the control of the agency. But after the election, a new person came into that office and just, boom, opened it all up. And I thought that was really fascinating. The legislation had already gone to the legislature and passed, and we have new rules now. But I thought it was fascinating, and I haven't had a chance to talk with that person in the agency about what her take on it was and why she decided to respond very differently from her predecessor. But it certainly made a huge difference. It just basically diffused the entire situation, which I thought was fascinating. The second thing is that our digital archives has what's called by the vendor a web drawer. And so, and maybe that's just a term that everybody knows. It's clunky. It's not really easy to use. We're really hoping to improve its functionality. But we already have one agency, the Department of Environmental Quality, which is very interested in transferring as many of their digital records, which are open to the public, to that web drawer as they can. And it's a great method for them to just say, oh, you can just look at it right there. And we're glad that our solution here in the archives works for them too. So I think that partially answers the question, but maybe not at the level that it was asked.
Yeah, I can try to speak a little bit. I'm definitely not the person involved, but I know at the state of Texas, there is something that Department of Information Resources, or DIR, which is kind of our statewide technology division, and we do work very closely with them on some elements. And we actually have some staff that have been involved with the open data portal, which is housed by the DIR, where it's basically agencies are publishing and uploading openly accessible data sets and lots of information. If anyone's interested in looking at that data portal, it's basically data.texas.gov, or if you just Google Open Data Portal, State of Texas, I'm sure you'll find it. So that's something that we do have some staff kind of loosely involved with that. And I can, if anyone has any particular questions about that, I'd be happy to kind of provide contact information if people have more questions, since I won't be able to intelligently discuss that. But Department of Information Resources is the one heading that. We also have been tracking, we have over time had some legislative activity the last couple of sessions about kind of open data, data management, cybersecurity being tied with that. Tons of things that we've been tracking that we're involved in. The other thing that we partner with Department of Information Resources on is we have every year an electronic records conference. It's a one-day conference that we usually host for all the records management officers with all the state agencies. We do open it up to local government entities as well. And then we also invite the information resource officers, which are usually the IT officers at each state agency are involved. So we kind of connect through the records management and IT worlds together. And usually there's always something dealing with data management, data wrangling. With our previous conferences, we've had some information about that. But more information about kind of data portal, definitely go to the State of Texas Open Data Portal to find out more information.
Okay, we had another question come in via Twitter. And the question, oh my gosh, there are two more. Wow. By the way, we have, from what I can see, around 40 people watching. So this might be a new record for Hangouts. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in. So we have two new questions. So the first is, and I think both of you can probably answer this. So what, if anything, can the Society of American Archivists do to support government archivists and records managers seeking to update retention schedules that would include police mobile camera footage. Now, SAA did issue a statement fairly recently about this, but do you have any ideas for what SAA could do to be more supportive of this?
I'm not exactly sure. I think one thing in hearing Kathy talk about what they implemented and then kind of what we implemented, of course, we did have some legislation. I think maybe just communications across all the archives and records professions in all the states. I think it's, we can all do our own research and find out what, Wyoming has implemented or, other states, but maybe there's a way for SAA to be able to have a section or somewhere where people can communicate sort of the research that they've done, being able to share research or those best practices in a better way. And I know because we had legislation that passed that was easy for us to sort of then translate that to a schedule. But, we didn't before a few sessions ago. And I think at that time we were, along with everyone else, trying to look at the universe by which, having to do some research and having to reach out to subject matter experts like legal and to understand kind of what would be the implications and best practices for retention. So I'm not sure how to facilitate that, but maybe there's just a way to facilitate better communication and being able to share our resources in a better way.
I actually have an idea, and it sort of builds on what Sarah was just saying. I've been a member of the RAO, the Reference Access and Outreach section, for a long time. And RAO has developed a lot of subgroups that take on specific issues. Teaching with primary sources is one of them that's kind of hot right now. But it could be that some task force from the records management section could take on not developing one schedule, because it's going to have to, meet every state's legislative needs, statutory needs, but could be that clearinghouse for information on what everyone else is doing. They could figure out whether there is legislation in that state, whether there are local regulations, how recently has the schedule been revised, what language is in the schedule, and so forth. Because in many ways, each one of us in every one of our states are doing that same research. Why not have it be done centrally by a task force?
And I can speak to a little bit of what just came up from both of you. If people are interested in sort of how are different jurisdictions handling body-worn camera, particularly, one resource that I found useful when I was scheduling my institution's law enforcement records around this was the Brennan Center has studied exactly this issue, which is how are different jurisdictions handling the retention and storage and preservation, the public record status of body-worn camera footage. So if anyone's interested in this, I encourage you to Google the Brennan Center body-worn camera policies map, and you can find stuff. Also, for anyone who's interested about this topic, Snowden Becker is an archivist that has studied body-worn camera extensively. She did a hangout with the records management section, I think last year, a year or two ago. And so you can find that video with her on our YouTube channel. And then finally, within Society of American Archivists, there is a group called the Committee on Public Policy. I'm a member of it. Brad Houston is an incoming member of it. And we often are involved with some of the drafting of statements that come from SAA, usually at the earlier end, and then it's often reviewed or adopted by council. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the Committee on Public Policy, they can get in touch with me. Or if you'll be in Austin, you can attend the Brown Bag Forum that I am co-hosting with another member on Sunday at lunchtime. So I think we have at least one more question.
Eric, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure that I looked at a statement that came out from the Brennan Center. And one of the things that I noticed, because not everyone's an archivist, very often the statements have to do with access to the records, but they don't say much about how long the records should be kept. There's kind of an underlying assumption that they'll be kept forever, and we know that isn't going to work. So I guess I would just say, I still think that there's a place for archivists to be gathering some information, because the first question that has to be asked is, how long do we keep them? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I will say that they do actually have a big chart of their of all of the identified retention policies, but Kathy's exactly right, which is that even though they have that chart, we all know that sometimes these retention decisions are ultimately made by people who are not archivists and records managers. So it's a point well taken that it's great that things like the Brennan Center have put together information about this. But if archivists and records managers aren't driving that conversation, sometimes other interests can be represented, and maybe they're not always in the public interest the way that we would like to have. There's one other a question we had that just came in, and so maybe we can begin ending with this one. And this: have either Wyoming or Texas had any issues responding to public records requests for agency-owned records that are in record storage centers that the archives run, or electronic records management systems? And if this has happened, are either the requesters or the agencies confused about how this should work? And let me know if you need me to restate the question, because that was kind of a dense one.
Okay.
I think I understand the question, or at least I'll answer what I think. So I know we run the State Record Center, so we do house inactive storage of paper records for state agencies and local governments in a record center. And many times we do get requests from the public to have access to the records that we have stored at the record center. However, we have to educate people that we are the temporary custodians, that we are holding the records, but we are not the custodians in the sense it's not our records to release. So we always have to educate and tell the people they must contact the agency themselves to be able to get access to the records. And then my lights go off again. So that is one thing. And usually it's just kind of reiterating, we have to educate people about what that means. Some people still don't understand, but usually we just kind of have to say access or talk to the agency and submit your request via them, because it's still their records. They're not our records. It's not Texas State Library and Archives Commission. We're housing the records for them. It's not our records to be able to release or be able to provide that information. Not sure if that was the question, but that's how I interpreted it.
And I guess I would say that we have a slightly, I can't think of the last time that we got a request for records from our record center, not by the agency. What's more likely to happen is that the agency itself will receive a request, and then again, because of staff turnover and things like that, they just don't even know what we have. And so they call us and they say, do you have records from this time period? And then we can take on that part of the request, and it's pretty easy. So sometimes it's just kind of a lack of understanding on the part of the agency staff about what's been sent to the archives or the record center over time. And so that's an education process too.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. We sometimes even get questions from agency staff requesting records from us from the record center, as well as requesting things that actually have been transferred to the archives. So it's kind of, we have to educate people on, there's a state record center for inactive agency records that haven't been sent to archives. And then yes, there are records that we have been sent to archives, and we kind of have to find out what they're looking for to kind of direct their question to the appropriate people to get access to the information they need.
Great, thanks to you both. I just want to make a quick note that for people who are only watching on YouTube, a number of people over on the hashtag SAARMS have posted a number of useful links related to some of the topics that have come up during Q&A. So that is a great resource for you to look back on if you want some useful links or anything here. One thing that I want to mention before we wrap is that the records management section will be having our annual meeting in Austin on Saturday, August 3rd at 3:15, and one of our guests will be Sarah. So if you can come to that, please do. I will say that I am obviously biased, but the records management section often has an excellent program, and I believe some of the other steering committee members are handling it, but I believe that this year we may have prizes again and a short icebreaker. So make sure you pencil that in on your schedule. Kathy or Sarah, I want to give, if there's any final things you want to say or things that you think are great resources for some of the topics you brought up, or sources of inspiration for you that you want to share a final word with, this is your time.
I'll go
We're
ahead. We
speechless,
were both
right?
like,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. I guess I'll just close with just to say I'm a resource. So I definitely, if anyone has any questions about anything I didn't cover or about kind of how things are structured in the state of Texas with our records management program, laws and rules, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. Hopefully we can share, my contact information can be shared with those who attended. We, on our website, again, you can go to our Texas State Library Archives website and see the tab for records management. And that is just the main portal by all of our stuff is accessible. We very much try to upload as much as we can to kind of share all of our resources and information, not only to our customers who access that information daily, but to other people who need to have access to it. So if you're not finding something there, just don't hesitate to reach out to contact me, and I'm happy to share any of the things that we have. One thing that we're trying to work on is one big arm of our thing, which I didn't really talk about, is our training program. And we do face-to-face training as well as online training to local governments and state agencies throughout the state of Texas. So there's an access to our online training resources there. And we're also trying to build up a clearinghouse, so to speak, of training materials that people can share and use. So I'm happy to even just share even our training resources as well. So just wanted to say that.
And actually, I'll put in a plug for Sarah's training resources. I've looked at them a number of times from Texas, and it's something that we don't do a lot of here in Wyoming. I wish we did more. And I do turn to Texas from time to time. I wish I could, go to the workshops or send my staff to the workshops.
Thank you.
I end up using, there's a list of state archives websites on the COSA website that I use a lot. Just because it's a handy way in. I'm just trying to think, and I guess people, call or contact me if you have questions about what we've done here, how our process, or how we've arrived at different conclusions. And my experience with SAA over the years is that almost all of us are that approachable. So if you see something on a website and it looks interesting to you, don't feel like you couldn't just pick up the phone or send an email and ask, how did that happen? What can I ask you further questions about it? Because I think we're, all of us, we spend a lot of time on the things that we do, and we actually want to talk about them. So ask us questions.
I think ask us questions is a really good note to end on. And I would also mention that the records management section, I think, is a section that is a real model of sharing information, being very collegial with the generosity of archivists and records managers. And one of the ways that you can get involved with this hangout was sponsored by and conducted by the Society of American Archivists Records Management section. And one of the things we love doing hangouts, we have a blog where we often have people guest post for us. So if you're watching this and you're interested in getting more involved, particularly if you're new to SAA, I think records management section is a great way to get involved. We'd love to feature a blog post that you might want to guest write for us about what you're doing at your repository. So if you are interested in this, come find one of the steering committee members at the annual meeting in Austin if you'll be in Texas. And if you can't be in Texas or you can't make that meeting, reach out to the current chair is Courtney Bailey, or the incoming vice chair is Jessica Dermasich. So if you want to reach out to them, we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I know it took us a little while to bring this together to find two excellent representatives from the local and state level, but I'm so pleased with today's conversation. I know I learned a lot. I think other people did, and thank you once again for your time and knowledge that you so generously shared with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, well, we will see some of you in Texas. Safe travels, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.